Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Story Hub. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The soft whirring of the laptop fan filled Brandon Carter's home office as he narrowed his eyes at the seemingly endless stream of figures on his monitor. Despite it being only 6:45 p.m., the October evening had already drawn in, casting elongated shadows across his desk. He'd been at this for hours, poring over quarterly projections for the company's upcoming expansion, but the numbers were starting to blur together. He raked a hand through his dark hair, leaned back in his leather office chair, and let his eyes drift to the framed photo on his desk, a snapshot from 2 years ago on his 10th anniversary with Tessa. The picture was from their trip to Greece, both of them beaming at the camera. Tessa's blonde hair glowed in the Mediterranean sun, and her green eyes sparkled with a joy that felt like it belonged to another era. Just then, his phone buzzed, lighting up with a new message, a text from Tessa, "Working late again, big presentation tomorrow. Don't wait up for dinner." Brandon's jaw clenched as he read it. It was the third time this week she'd claimed to be working late, always citing this elusive presentation that she never seemed willing to explain in detail. He opened up their text thread and scrolled through the past few weeks. A clear pattern was emerging: short, clipped messages, always about work, always involving late nights at the office. The shift in their relationship had been gradual, starting right after she got promoted to creative director 6 months ago. At first, it was little things, skipping their usual Sunday brunches, canceling movie nights, saying she was too exhausted for their evening strolls. Then came the emotional distance. Tessa, who once shared every detail of her day, had become vague and evasive, especially when he asked about her new boss, Eric Collins. Brandon vividly remembered the day she broke the news of her promotion. They'd gone out to celebrate at La Zone, their favorite French spot. Eric had made an unexpected appearance, claiming he was just coincidentally dining there too. Brandon couldn't shake the memory of how Eric's gaze seemed to track Tessa's every move, and how his hand lingered on her shoulder during the photos. Back then, he had shrugged off the unease as simple overprotectiveness. The chime of their security system pulled him from his thoughts. Tessa was home early, a rare occurrence lately. He heard the sound of her heels tapping against the hardwood downstairs, followed by the familiar thunk of her designer bag hitting the kitchen counter. "Tessa," he called out. "You home?" He pushed his chair back and made his way down the stairs, his socked feet padding quietly on the steps. When he stepped into the kitchen, he paused. Tessa stood by the counter, still in her work outfit, a sleek navy dress that fit her perfectly, her blonde hair styled to perfection under the bright kitchen lights. But something felt off. Her movements were hurried and nervous as she rummaged through her bag. "I thought you were working late," he remarked, leaning against the doorway. Tessa flinched, quickly pulling her hand away from her phone on the counter. "Oh, the meeting ended early. Eric had another engagement." "Eric again," Brandon noted, his tone deliberately even as he watched her reaction. "Seems like most of your late meetings are with him these days." "He's my boss, Brandon." She avoided his eyes, busying herself with the contents of her purse. Her phone lay face down on the counter, the screen lighting up intermittently with incoming notifications. "Isn't the Henderson campaign launching next week?" "That's a pretty big account, isn't it?" he asked, opening the refrigerator and noticing how she subtly turned her body away from him. "Did you eat? I could warm up the leftover lasagna from last night." "No, I grabbed something at the office." She continued shuffling items from her purse, lipsticks, crumpled receipts, anything to look occupied. "Actually, I think I'll go take a shower. It's been a long day." "Your phone keeps lighting up," Brandon pointed out. "It might be important." Tessa glanced at her phone, then quickly shifted her gaze back to her bag. For a split second, something like panic flashed across her face before she masked it. "Oh, just check it for me, will you?" It's probably the team with some last-minute questions about tomorrow's presentation. I really need that shower. Before he could respond, she was already halfway up the stairs, her steps too quick to seem casual. Don't wait up for me, she tossed over her shoulder. Brandon stood there, rooted to the spot in the kitchen, staring at her phone. In all their 12 years of marriage, Tessa had never, not once, asked him to check her messages. She was fiercely protective of her phone, especially in recent months. The screen lit up again, casting a soft blue glow on the granite countertop. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. The device was unlocked, yet another warning sign. Tessa was always meticulous about her phone's security, citing sensitive client data as the reason. The preview of the latest message made Brandon's heart freeze. Eric, missing you already. Tonight was incredible. Can still taste. The rest was cut off, but Brandon's fingers acted on their own, tapping to open the entire thread. What he saw next shattered his entire world. Eric, missing you already. Tonight was incredible. Can still taste you on my lips. When can I see you again? Tessa, soon. Maybe tomorrow after the team meeting. Brandon thinks I'm staying late for the Henderson presentation. Eric, perfect. My place. I want you all to myself this time, no quick office encounters. Brandon's vision blurred as he scrolled further up through weeks of messages. Every new line was like a punch to the gut. Last night was amazing. You're insatiable. Meet me at the Westbrook Hotel, room 742. Don't be late. God, the way you looked in that dress today, I couldn't focus in the meeting. Missing your touch. There were photos too, intimate ones Tessa had sent to Eric. Selfies of the two of them together, clearly taken in Eric's downtown apartment. His wife, the woman he had devoted 12 years of his life to, nestled in another man's embrace. But it was a message thread from just 3 days ago that felt like the final, crushing blow to his marriage. Tessa, we need to talk. I got a call from my doctor today. Eric, is everything okay? Tessa, no, everything is not okay. How could you not tell me? Eric, tell you what? What's wrong? Tessa, I tested positive for herpes. The doctor says it's incurable. How could you not tell me you have this? Eric, baby, I'm so sorry. I didn't think, I haven't had an outbreak in years. I thought. Tessa, you thought what? That it was okay to risk exposing me without saying anything? To endanger my marriage? Eric, we can deal with this together. There are medications. Tessa, God, what am I going to tell? What if I've already? I can't believe this is happening. The sound of water running from the upstairs bathroom seemed to echo through the silent house as Brandon clutched the kitchen counter, trying to steady himself. His entire life, his marriage, his trust, his health, was unraveling, all because of the woman upstairs, currently rinsing away the evidence of her latest betrayal with her boss. With methodical precision, he started taking screenshots of the damning messages, sending each one to his own phone. His hands moved on autopilot while his mind grappled with the enormity of the situation. He saved everything, every incriminating message, every intimate photo, every detail of their secret meetings. He even found their plans for the upcoming company gala, where they intended to sneak away together. The water shut off upstairs. Brandon quickly closed the message thread and placed the phone back on the counter exactly as it had been. He walked into the living room and sank into his armchair, shrouded in darkness. His own phone felt like a lead weight in his pocket, loaded with undeniable proof of his wife's betrayal. About 40 minutes later, Tessa came downstairs, wrapped in her silk robe, her damp hair carrying the scent of her expensive shampoo. She hesitated in the doorway, visibly surprised to find him sitting there in the dark. Brandon? Why are you sitting here without any lights on? He gazed at her, studying her features in the dim light spilling in from the street lamps outside. How many times had she come home after seeing Eric, taken a shower, and then slipped into their bed as if nothing had happened? Any important messages? Tessa asked, her voice laced with an attempt at casualness that now seemed painfully transparent to Brandon. No, he said, keeping his tone calm and even, despite the storm raging inside him. Nothing of importance. She shifted uneasily under his steady gaze. All right, well, I'm heading to bed. Don't stay up too late, okay? Brandon watched her retreat back upstairs, already beginning to form a plan in his mind. He pulled out his phone and went through the screenshots he had taken earlier. Each image felt like a stab to his heart, but he knew he needed them all for what was coming next. The following days flew by in a haze of quiet observation and meticulous evidence gathering. Brandon put on a mask of normalcy while continuing to document every sign of Tessa's affair. 3 more times that week, she claimed to be working late with the team, and each time, he tracked her phone's location straight to Eric's upscale apartment in the exclusive Riverside district of the city. During work hours, Brandon threw himself into his tasks, but his nights were spent strategizing. He began digging into the details of the upcoming company Gala, an annual black tie event where the firm would highlight its recent achievements to clients and key industry figures. Tessa had mentioned it briefly over breakfast one morning, pushing her scrambled eggs around her plate without looking at him. About the gala next week, she said, her eyes fixed on her food. I don't think it makes sense for you to come this year. It's just a lot of boring business stuff, clients, presentations, that sort of thing. You'd be bored out of your mind. Brandon had nodded along, fully aware from their text messages that she and Eric intended to use the event as an excuse for another secret tryst. They had even gone as far as booking a hotel room at the very place hosting the gala. Whatever you think is best, he replied, noticing the relief that washed over her face when he didn't put up a fight. I've got some work to catch up on anyway. One evening, exactly a week after he had discovered her infidelity, Brandon sat alone in his home office, reviewing all the evidence he had painstakingly collected. He had everything: text messages, photos, location data, even hotel receipts. It all painted a vivid, undeniable picture of her betrayal. He had also saved the conversations where they plotted to keep the affair under wraps, including Tessa's frantic messages about her positive STD test. A new text message from Tessa buzzed on his phone. Working late again. Important client meeting. Don't wait up. Brandon immediately opened the tracking app and watched as her location dot moved steadily toward Eric's apartment once again. His jaw tightened as he took another screenshot and added it to the growing folder of evidence. There was a time when seeing such proof would have brought him to his knees, crushed by the weight of his pain. But now, it only fueled his determination. He opened his laptop and began organizing everything into an email to himself, meticulously labeling each piece of evidence. It had to be perfect for what he had planned. The company gala was just 2 days away, and Brandon was determined to turn it into a night that neither Tessa nor Eric would ever forget. The rhythmic tapping of rain against the windowpane pulled his attention away from the screen. He got up and walked over to look out at the dark, rain-soaked street below. Somewhere out there, his wife was wrapped in another man's arms, blissfully unaware of what was coming. But soon enough, she would realize that her actions carried real consequences. A text notification popped up on his phone. Eric, you were incredible tonight. Can't wait for the gala. Hotel rooms booked, the presidential suite. Tessa, me too. Brandon has no clue. He thinks I'll be networking all night. Brandon's hand clenched around his phone as he read their smug exchange. They genuinely believed they were being clever, that their little secret was airtight. The sheer irony almost made him chuckle. They had no idea the storm that was brewing. He spent the next hour refining his plan for the gala, carefully thinking through every possible outcome, ensuring no detail was overlooked. By the time Tessa finally crept back into the house that night, slipping into bed with the faint scent of someone else's cologne clinging to her skin, Brandon lay wide awake, silently contemplating how drastically their lives would change in just 48 hours. The following morning dawned bright and crisp, with sunlight streaming through the curtains. Brandon watched Tessa go about her usual routine, blissfully unaware that her web of lies was about to collapse around her. She was wearing a striking red dress he didn't recognize, likely a new purchase meant to impress Eric, he thought bitterly. "I might be home late again tonight," she mentioned, applying her lipstick in the kitchen mirror. "There's a lot to wrap up before tomorrow's gala." "Of course," Brandon replied, taking a sip of his coffee. "You're working on the Henderson campaign presentation, right?" She hesitated for the briefest of moments, a pause so slight most wouldn't have noticed it. "Right. It's a big deal for the firm." "I'm sure it is," he said, observing her as she gathered her things. He noted how she kept glancing at her phone, unable to go more than a few seconds without checking it. "Good luck with everything." She leaned in and kissed his cheek, her expensive perfume lingering in the air between them. "Don't wait up, okay? Love you." Brandon watched her walk out the door, knowing this might be one of the last times he'd see her as his wife. After the gala tomorrow night, there would be no turning back, no apologies, no forgiveness. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever heal. The rest of his day was spent preparing meticulously. He made sure every piece of evidence was easily accessible on his phone, the screenshots, the GPS tracking data, the hotel receipts, everything he needed to expose their affair. But the most damning part was the conversation about the STD, undeniable proof of the reckless consequences their deceit had brought. That evening, Tessa called to say she'd be working late at the office once again. Brandon played along, responding absent-mindedly, even though he knew from their text thread that she and Eric were finalizing their plans for the gala tomorrow night. They were so confident, so sure they had everything under control. Little did they know what was actually coming their way. As he ended the call, a strange sense of calm washed over him. Tomorrow night, everything would be different. Tomorrow night, both Tessa and Eric would face the consequences of their betrayal. He walked over to the bedroom closet and pulled out his best suit, a perfectly tailored charcoal gray he'd worn to countless corporate events in the past, always playing the part of the supportive husband. Tomorrow, he'd wear it one final time, but this time with a very different purpose in mind. He laid the suit out on the bed and allowed himself a brief moment to reflect on the good times they'd shared, moments like their wedding day, romantic weekend getaways, and lazy Sunday mornings spent in bed. But now those memories felt hollow, overshadowed by the harsh reality of her deceit and the secret meetings she had with Eric. She hadn't just risked their marriage, she had put his health in jeopardy, all for fleeting moments of passion with her boss. A notification buzzed on his phone. It was another message from Tessa. "Tessa, so excited about tomorrow. Everything's going to be perfect." Brandon stared at the screen, knowing that her excitement wasn't about the gala itself, but about the rendezvous she had planned with Eric afterward. A week ago, reading this might have destroyed him, but now it only strengthened his resolve. Tomorrow, the illusion they'd so carefully crafted would come crumbling down. He didn't bother replying to her text. Instead, he took a seat at his desk and went over his evidence one last time. It all had to be flawless when the moment of truth came. Tomorrow, there would be no room for denial or explanations, only cold, hard facts. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a crisp, cold night. Brandon stood by the window once more, gazing up at the clear sky filled with stars. Somewhere out there, Tessa was wrapped up in Eric's arms, probably believing her deception was still safe. But tomorrow night, the truth would be laid bare for everyone to see. He turned away from the window and headed to bed, though he knew sleep would likely evade him. Tomorrow was the turning point. He was prepared to reveal their affair, to watch their intricate lies crumble to pieces, and to make sure they faced the full consequences of their actions. Lying there in the darkness, Brandon thought about how drastically his life would shift after the events of tomorrow night. One thing was certain, forgiveness was out of the question. Some betrayals were simply too deep, beyond any hope of repair. As the last traces of daylight disappeared from the sky, he went over his plan one final time. The company gala was set for tomorrow, and that's when Tessa and Eric would realize that karma had caught up with them. Brandon intended to be there, watching it all unfold. The night of the company gala arrived, bringing with it a sharp autumn chill that swept through the city streets. Brandon stood before his bedroom mirror, methodically adjusting his charcoal gray tie. He felt the cool metal of his wedding ring as his fingers brushed against it. Tonight would be the last time he'd ever wear it. Checking his phone one last time, he confirmed that everything was set. He had the screenshots, the GPS data, the hotel receipts, and the most incriminating evidence of all, the messages about the STD. Each file was neatly organized, ready to dismantle the facade his wife and her lover had built. A notification blinked on his phone. It was another text from Tessa. Tessa, having pre-gala drinks with the team. Everything looks incredible. Thanks for being okay with me going solo tonight. Love you. His jaw clenched as he typed out a response that was intentionally casual. Brandon, enjoy yourself. The Grand Plaza Hotel loomed ahead, its limestone exterior bathed in soft, elegant lighting. Through the expansive windows of the grand ballroom, Brandon could see the guests arriving, women draped in designer gowns, men in impeccably tailored tuxedos. It looked like a scene straight out of a luxury magazine spread. It seemed almost poetic that this setting would serve as the backdrop for tonight's reveal. As he walked into the marble-lined lobby, the sounds of clinking glasses and polite laughter filled the space, echoing off the high ceilings. A young hostess approached him, her smile polished and professional, holding a sleek tablet in her hand. "Good evening, sir. Are you here for the Collins Marketing Gala?" she asked. "Yes," Brandon replied, adjusting his jacket slightly. "Brandon Carter." The hostess hesitated for a split second, her smile faltering. "Oh, Mrs. Carter mentioned you wouldn't be attending. Let me just check the list." She fumbled with the tablet, clearly caught off guard. "Is there a problem?" Brandon's tone had a sharp edge to it, enough to make her visibly nervous. "And no, of course not, Mr. Carter. Please go right in." She gestured toward the ballroom doors, still flustered. The ballroom was a showcase of corporate extravagance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden light over the tables, each one covered in pristine white linens. In the corner, a string quartet played a soft melody that was almost drowned out by the hum of conversation. Waiters dressed in black tie moved gracefully through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne flutes. Brandon spotted them immediately. Tessa stood by the lavishly decorated bar, wearing a deep burgundy gown that seemed designed to capture every glance in the room. Her blonde hair was styled in an elegant updo, and a sparkling diamond necklace adorned her neck, the same one he had gifted her for their anniversary last year. Eric Collins was standing far too close to her, his hand resting possessively on her lower back as he leaned in to whisper something in her ear. The two of them laughed together, lost in their own world, oblivious to everything around them. "Brandon!" A familiar voice called out, pulling his attention away. Laura Brooks, one of Tessa's closest colleagues from the creative team, was standing nearby with a champagne flute in hand, her expression a mix of surprise and unease. "I thought, well, Tessa told me you weren't coming tonight." "Change of plans," Brandon said smoothly. "I couldn't miss the big presentation for the Henderson campaign. Tessa put in so many late nights for this, after all." Laura's eyes flickered nervously toward where Tessa and Eric were standing together, then back to Brandon. "Right, the presentation," she said, her tone loaded with unspoken meaning. "She's been working really late. Lots of private meetings with Eric." "I'm sure they've been very productive," Brandon replied, his voice laced with a cold edge that made Laura instinctively step back. "Tell me, Laura, does everyone know?" Laura's face turned pale, and she nearly spilled her champagne. "No, about what?" "My wife and her boss," Brandon said quietly but intensely. "About all their private meetings, in his office, at his apartment, at the Westbrook Hotel. The blood drained from Laura's face. I didn't think it was my place to. How long have you been covering for her? Brandon's voice lowered, but his intensity only increased, making Laura flinch. How many times did you help back up her lies about late nights at the office? I didn't, well, I suspected, but, she took a deep gulp of champagne, clearly rattled. Look, it's complicated. There's office politics, you know. I couldn't just. No, he interrupted sharply. It wasn't complicated at all. You chose to be part of the deception. Remember that when everything falls apart tonight. Leaving her there, mouth agape like a fish out of water, he pushed through the crowd. More people were watching him than usual, his unexpected presence was already causing a stir. Perfect. He wanted an audience for what was about to unfold. Across the room, the sound of Eric's confident voice rang out as he tapped a knife against his champagne glass. If I could have everyone's attention, please. The lively conversations died down, and all eyes turned toward Eric, who stood in the spotlight, Tessa beaming by his side. He looked every bit the polished executive, dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo, his silver hair slicked back with precision. Thank you all for being here tonight, Eric began. Before we dive into the Henderson campaign presentation. Actually, Brandon's voice sliced through the silence like a blade, I have something to present first. The room fell into a stunned hush, punctuated by the sharp sound of glass shattering. Tessa's champagne flute had slipped from her hand, crashing into pieces on the marble floor. Brandon? Her voice quivered, eyes wide with shock. What are you doing here? He made his way toward them, his phone in hand, feeling the weight of every stare in the room. Supporting my wife, of course, he said, a thin smile on his lips. Isn't that what a good husband does? This isn't the right time, Eric interjected smoothly, though a muscle in his jaw twitched with tension. We're in the middle of. The middle of what, Eric? Another lie? Another secret meeting? Brandon's voice rose, cutting through the silence like a hammer. Tell me, does your wife know you're sleeping with mine? A collective gasp rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. The confident smile Eric had been wearing faltered. You're causing a scene, Carter. Security. Oh, I'm just getting started. Brandon held up his phone for everyone to see. Who here wants to see the proof? The text messages, the hotel receipts, the intimate photos you both thought were so cleverly hidden. Brandon, please, Tessa whispered, her face drained of color. Not here. We can talk about this in private. Why not here? He shot back, his voice filled with a fierce, raw anger. You've had no problem lying here, working late here, using this company as your cover for an affair. He turned to address the room, his voice ringing out clearly. Did you all know? Your creative director and your CEO have been carrying on an affair for months. They've been using company time, company resources, to keep their little romance going. Eric stepped forward, his face flushed with a deep, angry red. That's enough. Security, get this man out of here, now. Before you do, Brandon said, his voice icy and calm, maybe you all should hear about the STD first. Go on, Eric, tell everyone how you gave my wife an incurable disease without even warning her. Tell them how you risked not only her health but mine too. The room fell into a stunned silence. Tessa looked like she might collapse, clutching the edge of a nearby table for support. Then, from the crowd, Vanessa Collins, Eric's wife, emerged. Her face was contorted with a mix of fury and disbelief. What did he just say? Vanessa's voice was sharp, filled with rage. Eric? The shock in her tone cut through the quiet, turning every head in the room toward the couple. Eric, answer me, she demanded. Eric's polished demeanor began to crumble as he faced his wife. Vanessa, sweetheart, I can explain. Explain what? Vanessa's voice rose, echoing off the ballroom walls. That you've been sleeping with your employee? That you've had an STD and never told me? Without warning, her hand lashed out, connecting with his cheek in a loud, resounding slap that reverberated throughout the room. How long have you been lying to me? The room erupted into chaos, but Brandon remained calm, watching it all unfold like a carefully scripted play. He could see Tessa shaking, her face twisted with shock and the sting of betrayal. Taking a deep breath, he pulled up his email app and hit send on a message he had prepared earlier. I've just sent copies of all the evidence, he announced, his voice cutting through the commotion, to the board of directors, HR, and several key clients. I imagine tomorrow's meetings will be quite lively. You've destroyed everything. Tessa wailed, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. How could you do this to me? No, Tessa, Brandon replied, his tone cold and unyielding. You destroyed it yourself. With every choice you made, every lie, every betrayal, every time you came home to me after being with him. He slipped off his wedding ring and let it fall to the floor, the metallic clink echoing in the stunned silence. This was your doing. Two security guards in black suits finally arrived, approaching him cautiously. Brandon held up his hands. There's no need for that. I'm leaving. He turned to the room one last time, his eyes scanning the crowd. I just thought everyone here should know the kind of people they've been working for, the ones they've trusted with their careers and reputations. As he made his way toward the exit, a wave of buzzing phones spread through the crowd. The email he had sent was reaching devices all around the room. He could hear Vanessa's furious accusations, Eric's stammering attempts at excuses, and Tessa's muffled sobs, but he didn't turn back. In the lobby, the sounds of chaos spilled out behind him. He heard hurried footsteps approaching, and a desperate voice called out. Brandon, wait. It was Tessa, her tone pleading. He kept walking. Please, just give me a chance to explain. She caught up to him, grabbing his arm. He turned to face her, taking in her tear-streaked cheeks and the raw desperation in her eyes. Explain what? He asked, his voice as cold as ice. How you lied to me for months. How you betrayed everything we built together and put my health at risk without a second thought. I made a mistake, she cried, reaching out for him. We can get through this, get counseling, start fresh. There's nothing left to get through, he said, stepping back to avoid her touch. This wasn't just a mistake, Tessa. It was a series of choices, hundreds of them. Every time you met him, every lie you told, every night you came home and got into our bed after being with him. I love you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. No, he said, his voice hard and final. You loved the stability, the comfort of our life together, while you played your games with Eric on the side. He turned away. It's over. Don't contact me again unless it's through my lawyer. From the direction of the ballroom, more shouts could be heard as Eric burst into the lobby, his face purple with rage. Carter, you've ruined my marriage, my career, you've destroyed everything. You did that to yourself, Brandon said calmly, cutting him off. Actions have consequences, Eric. Consider this your reckoning. Without another glance back, he walked out into the brisk night air, leaving the chaos behind him. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages from stunned party guests, but he ignored them all. The evidence was out there now, spreading through social media and professional channels like wildfire. Sitting inside his car, Brandon finally let himself exhale. His hands trembled slightly as they gripped the steering wheel, but the determination that had carried him through the night hadn't faltered. He had done what needed to be done. Their carefully constructed lies had been shattered, and all he felt now was a cold sense of satisfaction. His phone buzzed, it was Tessa, calling again. He declined the call and blocked her number without hesitation. Then he did the same for Eric. They were no longer a part of his life, they could handle the fallout on their own. Driving through the quiet, empty streets, Brandon's mind drifted to what lay ahead. By tomorrow morning, the scandal would be the talk of the corporate world. Tessa and Eric's reputations would be in ruins, and the comfortable lives they had taken for granted would implode. Good, he thought. Some people might call his actions harsh, maybe even vindictive, but they hadn't lived through what he had. They hadn't felt the sting of betrayal or the shock of discovering their spouse's infidelity, along with the reckless risk to their health. They hadn't had their trust shattered so completely. His phone pinged with a text from Laura Brooks. Laura, OMG, the whole industry is buzzing. Vanessa's threatening to go public with the story. Board members are already demanding resignations. He didn't reply. The avalanche he had set in motion was already gathering speed. Social media would ensure their humiliation spread quickly, the professional world would blacklist them soon enough, and the stable, comfortable existence they had enjoyed would collapse. Back at home, Brandon poured himself a glass of scotch and settled into his darkened office. The moonlight streamed through the window, glinting off a photo on his desk, a picture of him and Tessa from their vacation in Greece. He reached over and placed the frame face down. That chapter of his life was over now. About 20 minutes later, his phone lit up with a news alert. Breaking, CEO of Collins Marketing resigns amid scandal. A grim smile played on his lips as he switched off his phone. He was done. Let them face the repercussions of their actions on their own. The night stretched out before him, silent and calm, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring more fallout, more chaos, more consequences for the two people who had betrayed him so deeply. But he wouldn't be there to witness it. His role in their story had come to an end. He loosened his tie and pulled it off, tossing it into the trash can. Like the wedding ring he had dropped on the ballroom floor earlier, the tie was a symbol of a life he was leaving behind. There would be no forgiveness, no reconciliation, no do-overs. Some betrayals cut far too deep for that. The city lights outside his window twinkled like distant stars, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded tonight. Somewhere out there, Tessa and Eric were grappling with the wreckage of their choices, feeling the sting of public disgrace and the harsh bite of betrayal. Good. Let them suffer as he had suffered. Let them experience the full weight of humiliation and loss. Though his phone was turned off, he could almost feel it vibrating with unread messages. By tomorrow morning, the story would be everywhere. Their professional reputations would be in tatters, their personal lives shattered beyond repair. But Brandon had no intention of reading any of it. He had gotten his revenge. Now, it was time to move forward. The scotch burned warmly as he drained the last of it, a pleasant heat spreading through him. Tomorrow would be the start of something new, a life without lies, without deceit, without Tessa. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe again. He was prepared for this. The morning after the gala arrived with a chill, the sky overcast and gray. Brandon sat in his home office, watching as notifications flooded his phone, the scandal spreading through social media and industry circles like wildfire. Each alert was another person learning about the sordid truth behind Tessa and Eric's betrayal. As he nursed his third cup of coffee, he skimmed through the headlines. Breaking, CEO of Collins Marketing resigns amid scandal. Corporate affair sparks major shakeup, board launches investigation. Industry giant topples, the Collins Marketing scandal exposed. His inbox was bursting with emails from old colleagues, industry contacts, and mutual friends. Did you hear the news? I can't believe what went down at the gala. Always had a bad feeling about Eric, but this is next level. At precisely 9:15 a.m., the doorbell rang, pulling him from his thoughts. He checked the security camera feed on his phone and saw Tessa standing on the porch. She was still wearing the burgundy dress from the night before, now crumpled and stained. Her once perfect hair was disheveled, and black mascara streaks lined her cheeks like the remnants of a battle. Tessa, his voice cracked through the intercom. What are you doing here? Brandon, please, she sobbed, pressing her forehead against the door. Just let me explain. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. He pressed the intercom button again, keeping his tone even. I told you, contact me through my lawyer. I've lost everything, she cried, banging weakly on the door. The company demanded my resignation this morning. My email's already deactivated. They had security escort me out like a criminal. Even my parents won't answer my calls, they're ashamed of me. Karma seems to be working overtime, he replied coldly. Did you even consider the consequences when you were sneaking around with Eric? I made a mistake, she shouted, hitting the door harder, her voice desperate. Mistake? Brandon's tone was cutting. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk, or missing an anniversary. You made deliberate choices, Tessa. Every single day, 4 months. He watched her through the camera as she slumped against the door, visibly crumbling. Where's Eric now? He asked, a bitter irony lacing his words. Not rushing in to save you. She let out a harsh, hollow laugh. His wife changed the locks. The board had an emergency meeting at 7 this morning, they forced him out. He won't even take my calls. He told me we need to distance ourselves to manage the fallout. Of course he did. Men like Eric only look out for themselves, Brandon said, his voice edged with a hint of pity. But you knew exactly who he was and chose him anyway. What about our life together? Tessa's voice cracked, pleading through the intercom. We've been married for 12 years, Brandon. Doesn't that count for anything? It meant everything to me, he said, his words sharp and unforgiving. I supported your career, celebrated your accomplishments, trusted you implicitly. But you threw it all away, for late-night meetings in hotel rooms with your boss. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Therapy, counseling, anything you want. Go home, Tessa, he said firmly. Or wherever it is you're staying now. And don't come back here. He switched off the intercom, ignoring her continued knocking. Through the window, he watched her finally turn away, shoulders slumped in defeat. She trudged toward her car, a sleek Mercedes she'd bought with the bonus from her promotion to creative director. Now, it felt like a cruel reminder of everything she'd lost. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Eric, you've destroyed everything I built over decades, my marriage, my company, my reputation. All because you couldn't handle this like a real man. This isn't over. Watch your back. Brandon didn't hesitate. He blocked the number without responding. Let Eric shout into the void, his threats were as empty as the promises he'd made to Tessa. In the weeks that followed, the fallout only grew worse. Industry contacts kept Brandon informed of the ongoing collapse of Tessa and Eric's lives. The board's investigation uncovered a history of inappropriate relationships involving Eric. Former employees began coming forward, sharing stories of harassment, favoritism, and the toxic work culture he had fostered. Vanessa Collins's divorce lawyers demanded a full disclosure of Eric's medical history, threatening additional lawsuits for reckless endangerment. Tessa's once stellar career lay in shambles. Her prized corner office had been emptied out, her client connections severed, and the industry network that once welcomed her had turned ice cold. Brandon heard through the grapevine that she'd moved into a cramped studio apartment on the other side of town, forced to sell off her designer clothes and luxury car just to make ends meet. No reputable firm in the city will go near them now, his friend Andrew remarked over lunch at their usual spot. The word is out, they're toxic. No one wants that kind of mess. Good, Brandon replied, setting his water glass down with a sense of finality. Actions have consequences. She's been calling the office, trying to get in touch with you, Andrew continued. Says she's in therapy now, wants to apologize face to face. I'm not interested in her apologies, Brandon said bluntly. She had her chance to make different choices. I'm not here for her redemption arc. As autumn slipped into winter, Brandon threw himself into rebuilding his life. He took on new projects at work, staying busy and focused. Photography, a passion he'd set aside during his marriage, became his weekend escape. He reconnected with old friends, relationships that had grown distant over the years with Tessa. The divorce process moved forward smoothly. Tessa wasn't contesting a single thing, agreeing to every term without a fight. Her new address was listed as a tiny studio in a rundown part of the city, a far cry from the upscale townhouse they once shared. One crisp December evening, as Brandon left the office, he noticed a familiar figure lingering near his car. It was Eric Collins, but he looked nothing like the polished executive from the Gala. His silver hair was disheveled, his sharp designer suit replaced by wrinkled khakis and a sagging sweater. "Here to make more threats?" Brandon asked, keeping a few feet of distance between them. "I've lost everything because of you," Eric slurred, the stench of expensive scotch heavy in the air. "My wife, my career, my reputation, it's all gone." "No, you lost everything because you couldn't control yourself," Brandon shot back coldly. "How many others were there besides Tessa?" The investigation dug up quite the history. Eric suddenly lunged forward, but his drunken state had slowed him down. Brandon easily sidestepped, watching as the once powerful man stumbled and crashed onto the pavement. "You're pathetic," Brandon said, looking down at him without a hint of sympathy. "And now everyone knows it. Stay away from me, Eric. Next time, I won't hesitate to press charges." He turned and walked away, leaving Eric sprawled on the cold concrete, a former king now with nothing left to rule over. As Brandon got into his car and drove off, the brisk December air rushed in through the open window, bringing with it a strange sense of closure. He hadn't expected it, but it felt like the final chapter had ended. Whatever hold the past had over him was starting to release, giving way to the clarity of a fresh start. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the scandal only grew worse. Industry contacts informed Brandon that Eric had left town, trying to restart his life out on the West Coast. He attempted to launch a new agency, but clients quickly learned about his past, and his efforts were met with resistance. His name had become synonymous with disgrace, and the career he'd once built was reduced to nothing more than whispers and rumors. Tessa, meanwhile, was struggling to piece her life back together. Through mutual friends, Brandon learned she'd finally managed to land a job as a junior copywriter at a small, obscure agency, a stark contrast to her former role as creative director. Her health had taken a turn as well, dealing with the consequences of the STD she contracted from Eric. The once glamorous lifestyle she'd cultivated had been reduced to a modest existence in a tiny studio apartment, far removed from the luxury she once flaunted. One warm afternoon in April, Brandon unexpectedly ran into Laura Brooks at his favorite coffee shop. She hesitated a moment before approaching, gripping her coffee cup as if it were a shield. "Hi, Brandon," she began, her voice awkward and uncertain. "I saw Tessa yesterday." Brandon didn't look up from his laptop, where he was reviewing photos from a recent shoot. "That's not my concern anymore, Laura." "She looks different," Laura continued, shifting uncomfortably. "The STD has taken a toll on her health. She's lost a lot of weight, and her hair." "Still not my concern," Brandon cut in, his tone steady, though his hand tightened around his coffee cup. "She still talks about you," Laura pressed on. "She keeps saying how sorry she is, how she'd give anything to undo it all." "Sorry she got caught, more like it." He shut his laptop and began packing up his gear. "The past is over, Laura. Let's leave it there." "She's really struggling," Laura said softly. "The side effects from the medication are brutal. She's lost everything, her job, her reputation, even her marriage." "Those are just the consequences of her own choices," Brandon replied, standing up. "Just like losing her job and her industry standing. That's how life goes." As spring turned into summer, Brandon focused on shaping his new life. He poured his energy into his photography business, which quickly began to flourish. Clients loved his ability to capture raw, unfiltered moments. Slowly, he started to trust again, cautiously, selectively, but never fully. The divorce process wrapped up smoothly. His lawyer informed him that Tessa had signed off on everything without a single objection. "She left a letter for you," his lawyer said. "Would you like me to forward it?" "No," Brandon answered calmly. "That chapter is closed." Months went by, and the scandal surrounding Tessa and Eric faded into the background, replaced by the latest round of industry gossip. Brandon's photography business continued to thrive, gaining a reputation for its honest, candid style. He was now in demand, known for his ability to capture the essence of truth in his work. One crisp autumn evening, an unexpected email from Vanessa Collins landed in his inbox. "Dear Brandon, I wanted to thank you for revealing the truth that night. It was a painful experience, but it needed to happen. Eric had been living a double life for years, putting not only your wife at risk but countless others as well. The investigation uncovered 3 more women he had infected without disclosing his condition. He's now trying to start fresh in California, but his past follows him wherever he goes. Last I heard, he's taken a job as a sales manager at a small print shop, a far cry from being the CEO of a major firm. I hope you found some peace in your new life. Sometimes, the harshest truths are the ones that set us free. Best. Vanessa." Brandon read the email twice before replying with a simple, "Thank you." Vanessa was right, the harsh truths had set them free, even if some hadn't wanted that kind of freedom. Exactly 1 year after the disastrous Gala, Brandon stood in his new apartment, gazing out at the city skyline. His latest photography exhibition had just opened to glowing reviews, exploring themes of truth, deception, and the inevitable consequences of one's actions. Life had moved on, leaving the wreckage of betrayal far behind. His phone buzzed with a message from an unexpected sender, Tessa. "Tessa. I know you'll never forgive me. I've come to terms with that now. The choices I made ruined everything good in my life. You were right, every decision comes with consequences. I'm living with mine every single day, the health problems, the career setbacks, the isolation. I just wanted to acknowledge that you were right about everything. This isn't about asking for forgiveness anymore. It's about accepting the truth. Goodbye, Brandon." He deleted the message without a second thought. Some chapters needed to remain closed for good. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever be forgiven. Occasionally, mutual friends would offer updates on Tessa's life, a small, obscure agency where she worked now, her ongoing health issues, the lonely studio apartment where she was trying to start over. Every detail confirmed what Brandon had realized that night at the Gala: karma was real, and it always came to collect its dues, with interest. Eric's downfall had been even more dramatic than expected. The man who once commanded respect in the boardroom was now handling small-scale print advertising in a quiet California town. His LinkedIn profile, now stripped of all its former accolades, told a stark tale of arrogance and consequences. He had attempted to start a new agency, but no matter where he went, his past continued to haunt him. 2 years after the fateful Gala, Brandon's photography business had blossomed into a thriving studio. He had carved out a niche for himself in corporate events, a fact he found ironic, given how it all started. His skill for capturing raw, candid moments made him highly sought after in the industry. He had learned to see the beauty in the truth, even when it was hard to look at. One quiet afternoon, an unexpected email popped up from Vanessa Collins. "Vanessa. I thought you might want an update. Eric tried to rebuild his career here, but it hasn't gone well. His reputation is still toxic in the industry. He's ended up working at a small print shop, just barely scraping by. As for Tessa, I've heard she's struggling even more. Her health has taken several hits. It's sad, honestly, but also quite fitting. I hope you've moved on and found some happiness. Take care. Brandon read the email with a grim smile before closing it without replying. Vanessa's message only confirmed what he already suspected: those who had betrayed him were now living with the full consequences of their choices. He didn't need their suffering to find his own peace, but he couldn't deny feeling a sense of justice in the outcome. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over another day in his new life. His camera was prepped and ready for tomorrow's shoot: new clients, fresh stories to tell. Life was moving forward, leaving the wreckage of the past behind. As he stood up, Brandon took off his wristwatch, the last physical reminder of the life he once shared with Tessa, and placed it in a drawer. It was time to let go of the final tie to that chapter of his life. That part of his story was done. He was ready for whatever lay ahead. Karma had delivered its verdict. Justice had been served. And for the first time in years, Brandon felt a deep, genuine sense of freedom.